Module 16, expressing and releasing emotions. So this is part 2 of our training on emotions, and in module 15 you had the chance to kind of think a little bit about feelings generally, but also we talked about repression and suppression. And in this module, I want us to talk a bit more about expressing and releasing our emotions. So, really important thing to do. But before we sort of get to that point of giving you some techniques and some guidance around expressing and releasing emotions, there's a bit of work that kind of, if we do this work up front, it almost gets us to a point where we don't need to express or we don't need to release what we're feeling, because we've kind of worked through what is actually coming up for us. Because such a high percentage of the way we think and the way we feel is not real. It's generated based upon our past experiences, by our values, by our view of ourselves, and certainly our view of other people. And our feelings and our thoughts work very, very quickly. So if you think about that emotional chain of events, you have a trigger. Before you know it, that has triggered an emotional reaction in us. And before we even have time to really stop and process that feeling, our minds have engaged and have started to create a story. And this happens really, really quickly. And the more you've gone round these cycles of thinking and feeling in a certain way, the quicker that those patterns are going to fire off. So interrupting that chain of events is really important. So before I start to share some techniques for expressing or releasing, what we want to do is we actually want to do a little bit of work that actually might see those feelings actually lessen and soften, just by actually giving them a little bit of airtime and actually thinking about what are those feelings really about for you. And if once you've got to that point where you've done this little bit of work, you then feel that you need to express to somebody else how something is making you feel, then we're going to work on that. But also, if that emotion is something that keeps coming up, a technique that's going to help you to just kind of sit with it and actually release that emotion, rather than it become a big story that you keep going over and over in your head and feel like you don't have an outlet for it. Because that is a lot of the time, it's the frustration that we feel because we don't have an outlet for how we are feeling. But the first thing is really understanding, are we the creator of how we are feeling? And if we are the creator, that means that we can fairly easily start to unravel that and unpick these stories that we are repeatedly creating in our lives that are creating this emotional disturbance for us. So the first thing I sort of want us to talk about is accepting and valuing our feelings. You know, I said that in the module last week. Our feelings matter, your feelings matter. So it's really important that you spend some time doing this work. It's really easy, especially if you find it really difficult to process what you're feeling, to kind of just discount it. And again, I spoke last week about, it's like this mount of energy that's building in our bodies like a pressure cooker. And if we don't give some time and attention to what we're feeling, we're gonna go off pop. And as I said, you know, we end up going at the wrong time, at the wrong people. Our responses to things are either under exaggerated or over exaggerated. So this work is really, really important. So before we even get to the point of expressing what we're feeling or releasing what we're feeling, there's kind of like a little bit of work to do. And it's like these 3 steps to really identifying what the feeling is. And that can be really difficult. You know, lives are busy, you know, to actually take the time to really tune in and identify what the actual feeling is. So that's the first part. And as always, there's a workbook that goes with this that's going to talk you through this in more detail. But, you know, getting into a habit, not always when something's happened. I think we can live very reactive to things. So we react when something's happened, when we've been triggered, we then have this big emotional shift. But taking time every single day to start tuning in and checking in with how you're feeling starts us starts to make us more aware of these different energetic shifts that go on in our bodies. So the first thing is to really start identifying what we're feeling. And I talked last week about the feelings wheel and learning a broader emotional language when it comes to what we're feeling. That stuff really helps, starting to identify when your feelings are at a 2, a 3 or a 4 enables us to be able to manage them and process them when they're at a much lower level. Once we reach those higher 7, 8, 9, 10, it's much harder to actually process that energy that's going on in our body, because we're moving into those fight or flight responses. So the first thing is about identifying what you're feeling, and then it is about exploring how you are interpreting or any predictions that you're making about those feelings, because this is how we work as humans. We think in circles, so we like completeness. Okay, so what happens? A trigger, we then have a feeling, and then we are giving meaning to that feeling. We're trying to understand what is going on, and you're probably not even aware that this is happening, but that's why in the slowing down, it really helps us to see that in those moments, so trigger, emotion, thoughts, more emotion, and then that feeds into our belief system, and then we react out the other end of it. And that can all happen in a really short space of time. So for example, I don't know, your partner does or says something, that's a trigger. You have this sinking feeling, or you might feel really angry. Your brain at that time will then create a story about how they're always doing that, or why have they done that. That's going to deepen the feelings that you're feeling. That's going to create a belief. A belief may be, why does this always happen to me? Am I the only one around here that does anything? And those kinds of thoughts deepen even more the emotional reaction that we're getting. And before we know it, we're reacting out. We are getting cross, saying something sarcastic, shouting either. So this whole process is about learning to slow this process down and start to understand what is going on at that point of trigger, and interpreting and looking at what predictions we're making about those feelings is really important. So when we start to, what we're trying to establish in the first part is what we're feeling and what we're thinking genuine. And it's hard sometimes to kind of let go of that, because we kind of want to believe that we're right. But actually, this isn't about whether it's right or wrong, but it is about trying to examine and explore and understand what is relevant for what's going on in the here and now, and what is at that moment in time being dragged up from our past experiences. Because it's when we're dragging things from our past experience that our response and our reactions to things are likely to be more heightened. So before we move into like expressing and talking to other people about how we're feeling or releasing, it's really important that we really start to get a handle on examining what we are feeling. So identifying what we're feeling, and also looking at what interpretations are we making about those feelings, and what predictions are we making about those feelings. And you've got an opportunity to do a little exercise, the first exercise in this module, that is going to talk you through those 3 steps, and it's going to get you working on an emotion that you kind of feel quite often, but maybe one that's related to quite a small thing. Exposure therapy is really an important part of this work, but what we don't want to do is start on a topic that's quite big and quite emotive, because you've got to practice the steps, the techniques first, and be comfortable with them, and then work up to dealing with some of the bigger things that you may have going on in your life, because then you're more confident and comfortable with the process. So that's the first exercise that I want you to do, guys, because working through those first 3 steps are really important, because quite often we feel like we need to express and we need to tell people about how we're feeling, when actually when we do that, they're kind of a bit clueless to it, because they're not party to the story that you have going on in your heads. So this is why it's really important that when you have these sort of the feelings that you're feeling, that you almost press that pause button, and then you do this step 1 to 3 where you start to go, right, what am I feeling? What am I interpreting from those feelings? And what am I predicting from these feelings? And this is like a gathering, an information gathering exercise. And it can feel a bit clumsy at the start, but the more you get into this habit of recognizing your feelings and then kind of just exploring them and asking yourself some questions around, what are you feeling? What does that mean? What are you making it mean? What predictions are you making? Is that true? So actually we really start to question and challenge the automatic thoughts and feelings that are coming up for us. And interestingly, what starts to happen when we start to do that is we start to recognize familiar patterns that we go through with our feelings and with our thoughts, and the beliefs that we attach to those thoughts and feelings. So just this part of the process, what we often find is the more clarity we get around when we have feelings, what we then create off the back of them. And I talk a bit about distorted thinking and stuff like that, because that's important to know that our thinking quite often is not balanced and isn't real. We are biased towards things, and quite often our thinking is distorted, and that distorted thinking creates distorted feelings, and then the way we act out the back of that is often not aligned to reality. And this isn't about whether you're right or they're wrong or you're right. This is about you learning to master and manage your own feelings in a different way, because when you do that, what comes out the other side of it is you feel much calmer and you trust yourself more, because you can instead of fearing or suppressing those emotions, you can actually start to allow them to be present and either work through them or talk to somebody about how you're feeling, or even like work through releasing them. So this first part is really, really valuable. So have a go at that exercise and let me know how you get on with it. So then we're going to move into looking at the two ways of what to do with an emotion when it's there and when something has come up for you. So this is like stage 4, if you like, stage 4 of the process. So whether you're going to express how you're feeling and talk to somebody, the person that, you know, your partner or a friend or a boss at work, that maybe there's something that keeps getting repeated and you need to talk to them about it to try and understand their point of view, or to actually just speak up and honour how something is making you feel. That expression of feelings is stage 4. And also the releasing technique that I'm going to teach you as well is also stage 4. So it's really important that before you get to the point of expressing or releasing, that you've gone through those first 3 steps, that you've actually checked in with why you're thinking and feeling in the way that you are thinking and feeling. So really important that steps 1 to 3 are done first. So the first one we're going to look at is expressing your emotions. And you're going to have an opportunity to practice. Exposure therapy is so important, as I said earlier, with this work. Okay, so the first part of expressing, so just checking my notes. You know, when we start to look at why we don't speak up, quite often there's these old stories that are going on. You know, childhood plays a part of that. I did talk about this more in the written training, but you know, childhood does play a big part in if we weren't encouraged to speak up as a child, or we were suppressed, you know, we're not practiced. It's not that you can't do it. It's often that we're not practiced. And sometimes we do speak up, but we speak up from a very emotive place, which often doesn't get the results. It often angers the other person, or they go quiet. So we don't actually get the resolution that we're looking for. So communication and how we communicate is so, so important when it comes to expressing what we're feeling. So that's a bit that I want to focus on today, and also exposure therapy, because we can sit and we can go over and over why you don't speak up or why you suppress your feelings, but ultimately there is only one way to move you forward, and that is to create opportunities where you can practice exposing yourself to speaking up, telling people how you're feeling. And I know that can feel really scary and that there's going to be resistance in there, which is why it's really important that you do try things that are fairly insignificant to start with whilst you're practicing the techniques. So for expressing your feelings, what you're invited to do is actually to think about a scenario that keeps coming up for you that you feel is not too big a thing to tackle, but something that you really could do with getting some resolution on. And the first thing I want you to do is make sure that you've done steps 1 to 3 on that feeling that you keep getting and that chain of events. Okay, so I want you to pick something and then I want you to run it through steps 1 to 3, because often in just doing that you gain some insight and some knowledge in that actually the thing isn't quite how you see it, and sometimes the need to then express it is no longer required. So choose something not too big, something that's going on in your life at the moment that keeps getting repeated, and I want you to run it through the stages 1 to 3. Okay, if you come out the back of that and it is still something, if someone isn't meeting a need that you need from them, or they're not hearing you, they're not listening to you, and there is a need for you to be able to communicate the impact of this to them, then you move on to stage 4. And in your workbooks, there are some guidelines around how to effectively communicate with somebody, because we've all got experiences where we haven't taken the time, we haven't pressed that pause button, we've gone charging in and we've delivered a message fueled with emotion, fueled with accusation, fueled with untruths, and it has got us nowhere. In fact, quite often it's got a retaliation, and then what we do is we back off and we end up licking our wounds and feeling like yet again we haven't been heard and we feel misunderstood. So when we actually take a look at how we communicate, you know, you've got the sender and you've got the receiver, and unfortunately for us humans, often there's a whole lot of noise that goes on in between the sending of a message, the speaking up, and it being heard. And so learning to effectively communicate is so important. But what's really important is communicating once you've gone through that, you've settled yourself down. So you start to communicate from a place of being neutral emotionally, not charged. When we try to communicate when we're fully charged, it's very unlikely ever going to get the result that we want. So run it through steps 1 to 3. So by the time you're ready to move on and have this conversation, you've gone through any predictions or any assumptions that you're making, and so you have deciphered this is definitely something that I need to talk to this person about. And then when you're at that point, just some guidelines, some tips that I've given you there around how to communicate. You know, a lot of things, you are assertive in areas of your life, guys. You know, it's like, you know, and that's quite a helpful thing to do, you know, to look at what areas of your life do you already find communicating how you're feeling quite easy. But in what areas of your life do you find it more difficult? And what areas of your life do you tend to go quiet and quite passive? And what areas of your life do you tend to go a bit more on the over assertive? So get a bit bossy, a bit aggressive maybe. Indirect aggression is that whole kind of when we're a bit sarcastic. So, you know, being really honest about those natural behaviour types. You know, are you somebody that can be assertive and speak up in certain situations? Are you somebody that tends to like go, oh no, don't worry about it, and be quite passive? Or do you tend to be more on the aggressive camp, i.e. outwardly controlling and manipulative? Or are you more indirect aggression, where you might be a bit sarcastic, you might say something because someone's leaving the room? You know, I can be a little bit like that. I tend to go more on the indirect aggression than the aggressive side of things. So, you know, that's a nice little exercise as well, to be really honest with yourself and acknowledge where maybe you are with certain people in your life. So we've run the thing through stages 1 to 3. We've said, right, this is it. I need to find my voice. I need to speak up about this. And then what we're going to do is like have some consideration around how to effectively communicate. So things like really sit down and think about what you want to say. You know, all too often when we don't prepare for what we're wanting to say, it comes out, like I say, with a lot of emotional attached to it, a lot of accusations attached to it. When you do this, you make me feel like this, and you know, that just gets someone's back up straight away. And when someone's back up, they are not going to hear you. So really important that you sit down and you minimize any misunderstandings that can happen. Okay, this is about you getting your point across, but it's really important. Being assertive is about being respectful of your needs and what you want to say, but also being respectful of what the other person wants to say. So really sit down and run through a couple of times what it is that you want to say, keeping it as factual as possible, because the minute you move away from facts and start making accusations, that's an invitation to like rile the other person. So things like deciding what you need from the other person. So when you're going to go into a communication with somebody, you know, think about the outcome. There's something called the assertiveness formula actually, and there's 3 stages to it. State what it is that someone's done that's upset you. The next one is state how it makes you feel, but again, remember, not too emotive. And then the last part is stating what it is you want from them. It's often the bit that we miss. We tell people what it is they've done that's upset us, but we don't actually then tell them what we need from them. So that's a really important part of communication, because quite often you'll tell someone what they've done and how they've made you feel, and they can then feel a little bit at loss as to they don't know how to remedy that. So the way we learn to ask for our needs to be met is by directing people and helping people to understand what it is that we need from them. Another really important one when you're going to communicate, you know, sometimes we're impatient and we want them to be able to talk now, but it might not be the right time for them. So even if it's a partner or a family member, actually saying, you know, I want to talk to you about something, when will be a good time? So again, you're lowering their resistance by making them feel respected and like they're part of that conversation. Another, always making good eye contact. You know, it can be really hard when you're having a difficult conversation, especially like when you're just learning, when this is all new, you know, so making that eye contact helps to build connection. Anyway, I'm not going to read through them all. There's like 10 tips there about how to effectively communicate that if you work through them, if you have your thing that you want to work on, run it through stages 1 to 3, then run it through the 10 ways of better communication. And as you come out at the end of that, you know, give it a go. Go and have that conversation with somebody. And you know what? It may go brilliantly or it may go completely tits up, you know, but then take some time to reflect on it. Reflect on what went well, what didn't go so well, what have you learned about yourself, what could you do differently next time? Because that's the scary bit. The scary bit with exposure therapy is being brave and actually doing it. So I really want to hear about the things that you're working on, and so we can maybe give you some tips and some pointers, but also let us know how it went for you. So the next way of processing those emotions, well, I say stage 4. So the processing of the emotions are really in that stages 1 to 3. It's an internal process where you actually, you recognize the trigger and the emotional shift, but then you spend some time working on what is that about for you. So the more you actually own those feelings and actually start to process them and work through them and understand them, the less likely you're going to actually need stage 4, which is actually the talking to somebody or the releasing of the emotion. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about releasing emotions, and it is a practice in itself. And for most of us as humans, even if we tell ourselves we want to let go of what we're feeling, we don't really. We actually want to hold on to the anger and the bitterness and the upset. You know, it's become so familiar to us, you know. Forgiveness is one that comes to mind. You know, it's we all kind of know on a conscious level that not forgiving somebody doesn't impact them at all. It just affects you. I always remember a friend saying to me, anger and bitterness is like holding a stinging nettle and expecting it to sting the other person, and it's absolutely true. So yes, that stages of 1 to 3 really, really important, and then releasing your emotions. Sorry about that. Someone unexpectedly came to the front door. So where was I? I was talking about how as humans, we think that we want to let go of these feelings that we're feeling, but quite often we actually don't. We want to hold on to them. We want to feel angry. We want to feel irritated. We want to be a bit pissed off with the world at times. And, you know, accepting that and acknowledging that is really important as well, because letting go, you've got to really want to let go. So if you're not quite at that point where you're really ready to start to let go of those emotions that are coming up for you. And there's no judgment there, by the way. I certainly wasn't. It's only been in the last few years where I've been able to kind of notice those feelings as they come up for me and not react to them. And instead of actually even giving any time and consideration to processing them, I've done so much work on understanding why I feel like I feel, that the next stage naturally just felt like sort of almost getting to that point where you feel the emotional shift, but actually you just sit with it and you allow it to process. And I'm going to talk you through a six-step technique of doing that. But it is something that you have to practice, and it is something that you need to be ready to do. But for many of you, you may find that actually you've got to go through the process of working through your emotions, discounting and pushing aside anything that's kind of an interpretation or a prediction, and also learn to speak out. Whether, something I forgot to mention when we were talking about expressing emotions isn't always talking to somebody. It is about expressing them in a journal. Something I do quite a lot is I talk out loud to myself. So that is expressing. And also when we start to do some of the inner and outer child work, actually having a dialogue between you and these other aspects of ourselves. We're like a Russian doll, and we've got these different aspects of ourselves. So expressing what we're feeling often is about us having those communications with ourselves, and that equally encourages healing, because sometimes we have these different aspects of ourselves that we don't listen to, and actually having open conversations with ourselves as much as we have open conversations with other people is even more powerful than those conversations we have outwardly. So releasing emotions. So there are a couple of sort of criteria there to get to the point of feeling ready to release emotions. One is, are you really ready to let go of some of these emotions that you've been holding on to for a long time? And I think when you reach that point, because you just get quite frustrated with these same patterns going over and over again. But you have to have let go of the need for it to be somebody else's fault. So to be able to release emotions, it's almost like you've got to be able to not label them anymore. So for us, I spoke about this in module 15, that with emotions, we attach labels to them. So a bit like good and bad foods, we attach labels to those, and we do the same with emotions. So to be in a place of being able to release emotions, we have to have detached any emotional label to it, any guilt or any blame of ourselves or of the person. It is almost like it is just an energy in our body, and when we can get to that point, that's when we can actually just sit with that emotion and allow it to be present, not allow the brain to start creating a pathway and a pattern that feeling means anything, or that it's someone's fault that you're feeling like that. So you can see it is a practice, because it's about letting go of all of that stuff. It's about letting go of all those chain of events that fire off as a result of things that are going on in our lives. And it is about being able to just really center ourselves and be with that energy that's coming up, and be curious about it and actually allow it to pass through us, because that's exactly what happens. If we don't overreact, if we don't overthink, this energy in our body lasts for about 90 seconds, but it's kind of like we're so used to ignoring it or reacting to it that we don't actually give ourselves time to just let that energy move through our bodies. So this technique I'm going to sort of work through with you is a six-step technique, and it's one to practice. And again, with something like with the expressing yourself, choose a feeling that comes up for you quite often, but not a really big one. Something that is like you're a bit irritated about, and that sense of irritation. So choose a feeling that isn't like a big one. If you've got beef with your parents and that brings up a lot of feelings around rejection or not belonging, that's possibly not the one to start with. Start with something that's smaller and practice the technique, and then build up. So what you're invited to do is choose a feeling, something quite small, something that's irritating you, and to actually work through the 6 steps. So step 1, the first step is to become aware that you're experiencing the feeling. This is something that's so important. Before you can kind of process what's going on for you, you have to start to become aware of what is going on energetically in your body. So taking some time a few times a day to just check in and say, oh, what am I feeling? We're very good. We know that we know when those intense feelings are there, but we kind of want to start just getting more attuned to our bodies generally. And the more attuned we come with the feelings in our body, interestingly, the more attuned to biological hunger we become as well. So step one is, the first step is to become aware that you're experiencing a feeling. This might be obvious, but sometimes we get caught up in the mind that we're not even aware of this. Okay, it is, we live in our heads, we do not live in our bodies. So that is the first step. So if you're not somebody that's attuned to your feelings, then that is the first step to practice getting more attuned to your feelings. Step two, the next step is to locate where in your body is the feeling. Often it will be in your stomach, a chest or throat. It will be a particular sensation that doesn't feel good. So step one, what are you feeling? Step two, where are you feeling it in your body? So we're looking for biological, physical sensations in your body that you're feeling that feeling. Step three is just feel it. From this point, you need to feel it as fully as possible. This means allowing it to be there without resistance. We must fully embrace any feeling that occurs and just allow it to do what it wants to do. So you can see that this is why this is a practice. So, and you really can learn to sit with that feeling, and you've got to remember that you're going to resist it, and your head is going to want to try and distract you, or it's going to try and create a story. And what you want to do is stay centered and focused on that energy in your body. So imagine it's if it feels like a whirling in your stomach, I want you to stay completely focused onto that sensation that is going on in your body. Step four, if we are able to feel the feeling fully, then there will come a stage where you realize that you're not feeling it anymore. You're separate from the feeling, because this is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to where you are focusing on that feeling to the point where actually it starts to naturally just go away and you stop feeling it. Step five is to let go of it. Okay, so once you become the observer of the feeling and it no longer actually has that intensity, that's when you can actually just practice to kind of almost close your eyes and imagine yourself letting it go. Again, this is a practice. I'm just having a read of my notes there. And sometimes you actually don't even need to, and this is where I'm at a lot of the time now, it just naturally goes on its own, because this energy in your body just kind of peters out a little bit the more attention you give to that, rather than engaging your brain. But if you're finding that that feeling is still there slightly, just imagine in your mind releasing it, and you might want to say some words in your mind that you're releasing this energy, and almost imagine it. Sometimes what I do is I shake my hands. You know, if dogs are if I say no to Poppy and Ernie, they kind of shake. It's like they're shaking off a negative energy, and I do that sometimes. So actually I imagine that I'm releasing that energy through my fingertips, and quite often it makes me laugh, so it changes my state anyway. So these are quite powerful tools that actually enable us to release that negative energy that we're holding on to. And step six is to examine yourself and notice whether you feel any different. The release of a feeling will be accompanied by a lighter sensation. So that's what I'm talking about there. I know when I actually imagine that I'm releasing that energy, I kind of laugh, and it moves me from a place of having that energy and that feeling to actually having a much lighter energy. So they're the 6 stages, 6 steps that I want you to practice. The first one is the feeling. Know the feeling. The second one is where in your body do you feel that feeling. The third one is to really concentrate on that in your body and like close down any thoughts that are trying to distract you. So really focus on that energy that's in your body, whether it's a whirling in your tummy or a tightness in your chest. Really bring your attention to that. The fourth step is, yes, you should notice that it starts to become less intense. It's almost like you're starting to separate yourself from that feeling. And then the fifth step is to let it go, and if it's not naturally dissolving, do something. Imagine, just literally flick it off or shake your body and imagine that that feeling is leaving your body. And it may not do it the first time you do it. This is a practice. You need to keep practicing it. And you might feel a bit silly shaking stuff off, but it is really powerful. It's called your changing state, and that is a really, really powerful technique to practice. And then the last part is just to examine how you're feeling after you've done that. Are you feeling lighter in mood? Because really important that when you practice these techniques, you see them working, you experience them working. So that's this week's training, guys, on emotion. So last week we looked at repression and suppression. This week it's all about expressing and releasing. But there's that big, really important chunk in the middle that is those 3 steps of you. When you recognize that you're feeling a feeling and the thoughts that go with that, is to really start taking some time to delve into that and to be like the judge and jury, if you like, of your own thoughts and feelings, where you actually start, instead of just running with them and reacting, you're really starting to be inquisitive and curious about what's going on for you. What are you interpreting from those feelings, and what are you predicting from those feelings, and how does that then lead to your behavior? Because ultimately this is about you starting to reduce those exaggerated feelings that you're having. That's not to say people around us don't do things that trip us off, but ultimately a lot of the stuff that we're working on here is from a long time ago, and we're reacting to something that happened a long time ago. And you know, we've got to like work through that. And you know, if somebody is doing something in the here and now that's upsetting us, we tackle that, read the thing that they're doing, not the thing that they've done every year for the last 10 years, because otherwise we go into a conversation with them almost like with our ammunition, and that doesn't build for effective communication. And if we don't effectively communicate, we don't get our needs met. So this module is about that big chunk in the middle, processing our emotions, and then some guidelines around an opportunity to practice expressing your feelings, but also releasing your feelings as well. So as always, anything that comes up for you, do come and share, but enjoy.